Hey everybody, welcome to this week's session. Actually, one of two CX on the Rock sessions this week. Happy to have you guys here. We're going to let a few minutes come by because people are starting to roll in a little bit. Always a couple of minutes after is pretty common. Actually, while people are joining, I'm going to share my screen a little bit for those of you who have not already. This is a collective, a community that you can become a member of and get access to. You go to cxontherocks.com, check out the website. You can always see who the consultants are as part of the group. As you can see here, JP right up top, and you can go look at upcoming events or past events as well and see some of those events as they've gone. But the key here is hit the big join now button. You'll sign up, just a few pieces of information, and then once you log in, you'll be able to access all this great content. We've got the events, the resources. We can see, and have community and conversation with each other as well. So great place to get a lot of great information as well, and be able to access, our content, especially these events as we go. So again, welcome everybody to the event today. Still have a few people rolling in. And but as we do, I just want to say, I am so happy to have JP joining us today. He's going to talk about really a topic near and dear to my heart, which I started on the phones back in 90 something, as a contact center agent. And it's always been this debate, it's cost center, et cetera. But the new pivot is cost center to value center. So JP, I'd love to have you start the conversation and share with the audience here.
Okay, so let me go ahead and do this for everyone. First of all, thanks everyone for joining. Let me bring up this slide and I'll tell you a little bit about me and who I am and all this fun stuff. So, I've probably spent the better part of the day listening to various CX leaders. There's a 6 or 7 hour seminar going on. And to Sean's point, this is probably one of the biggest topics that I've heard. Obviously, our friend AI, so I'm not going to talk too much about that right here in the intro. But I do want to talk about companies spend millions of dollars to elevate their brands. And outside of your digital footprint, unless you have a brick and mortar retail center, your contact center is really going to be the brand come to life for a lot of customers. And so with that said, there's a tremendous opportunity to turn so many of these contact centers into money-making machines. I mean, quite frankly, I believe that's what they are because these are individuals who are engaging with the customers on a regular basis. So with that said, I want to go ahead and get started here. Tell you a little bit about me. Obviously, I'm JP. In a nutshell, I've been doing this sort of work for more than 25 years. Some very big brands. I also am a consultant. CX and growth strategies is my business. But I think happy customers come from engaged and happy employees. And the contact center is a great way to drive that. Now, one of the things you'll also know about me is in addition to elevating the customer experience, whether it's revenue, customer retention, or employees, I'm a sneakerhead. So I can't show you my shoes now, but if you've seen any of my posts, you know I'm probably rocking some J's right now. But the bottom line is the reason why I wear those shoes, they make me feel comfortable, and it's the talking point. So let's talk about why we're here today. And there's really 5 things I really want to talk about. That you'll see the rule of 5 here, right? The first is, how did we get here with contact centers being considered expensive? We'll talk about the case to be made for why that can be a strategic blunder. I'm going to give you a framework as to how do you actually translate or transform a center from a cost center to a money-making machine, a revenue center, things that I've done. There's a handful of companies that I feel have done it well, and they've had a track record, and some of you may have heard of some of these businesses. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about the highly effective practices of these contact centers, with all respect to Stephen Covey. All right. So without further ado, how did we get here? No surprise, most contact centers are thought as what? They're usually thought of as some sort of business is going to cost you money. Essentially, necessary evils, like I like to call them. But here's the problem with that. When you have that sort of mindset and you think of your center as being expensive, guess what happens? You end up not only focusing on internal operational metrics, but the customer experience suffers. And when that happens, those customers don't come back. Now, related to this mindset of reduce expenses, you also get a mindset of, well, anyone can do this work. And when that happens, not only do you devalue the customer experience, but you devalue the work that the individuals who are doing it, and they sense that. So my question to the group is, what do you think the level of effort is going to be with a team that feels that way? Do you think they're going to go the extra mile? Now, here's the rub. Poor customer service, $75 billion a year. So I'm going to say that louder for the people in the back. Poor service costs businesses $75 billion a year. Now, if you think about 2/3 of customers are going to choose a company based on the level of service that they receive, doesn't it make sense to invest in your contact centers and turn them into profit-making machines? Agree or disagree? This is the audience engagement part.
We agree.
Okay, perfect. All right, just checking everyone's mic. You're still there? Love it. Okay, so here's the case to be made for exceptional service, and there's really 3 key points. Now, because of my background in retention, I'm a little bit biased here, but retention drives profit. I can tell you in some of my experiences when sales wasn't necessarily delivering because of slow demand in the business, it was retention that ensured that the bottom line of the company was met. So I'm a little biased here. Now, you've got studies that say if you put all your money in acquisition, it's going to cost you 5 to 25x to get that return. However, 5% lift in retention, huge. 25 to 95% boost in profits. So that's a hard stop. So you should be focused on retention, the customers that you already have. The second piece is good service drives repeat business. Because if you have a great experience, guess what you're going to do? You're going to keep spending money with that company. There's no surprise there. And number 3, if you provide a great experience, well, guess what? You're probably going to outperform your peers from a revenue perspective. And again, each of these numbers that I quote, you'll see at the bottom, there's a footnote. We can look it up. You can tag it. This is good stuff, even though we know that 98% of statistics are made right on the spot. All right. So with that said, let's talk about your very, very first strategy. Redefine what success looks like in your contact center. So this sounds a little bit like change management. So this involves moving away from some of these traditional metrics that we typically use in the business, AHT and other sort of things in the business. Let's talk about what matters most. So as you can see in the pyramid, we've got revenue linked to satisfaction, linked to revenue, retention rates, and lifetime value. This is how we start to transform the business. We start to think about what matters most. So if you see below, if all you did was focus on reducing costs, then it's no surprise that your agents are going to rush through calls. So in order to make a better experience for your customers, you got to change not only what you measure, but what you reward so that you can drive that right type of experience. But here's the rub. In the contact center, as well as the CX space, we really need to focus on business outcomes. Speak the language of the CFO. When we start to talk about customer retention, lifetime value, and revenue generation, those are going to be critical to ensure that this transformation takes root. So again, the very first strategy is you have to redefine what success looks like. As I mentioned earlier, I'm bullish on retention. I think this needs to be one of your critical performance indicators because a customer who stays is typically a customer who pays. Now, we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the results that T-Mobile saw, 37% churn reduction. I've talked about the profit increase, but look at this number in the middle of the page. You have $700 million in revenue gain, and that's over 3 years by simply improving your customer experience. So again, if you were to treat retention as a key outcome in your business and then track each interaction in terms of what it adds to the bottom line from a service perspective, meaning that these are customers that we keep. If you don't have a save desk today, you probably want to get one, or at least ensure that those individuals who are supporting customers understand how to keep our at-risk customers and then measure that over time and translate that into revenue. Any questions about the first concept? The second one is empower your frontline heroes. Now you've got training on the page, making sure agents have the right tools, but there are two that I've highlighted because I want to talk about my experiences. When I was running teams, I would get executive escalations. And these are customers who were hot. They didn't want to do business with us anymore. But as we started to dig into some of these issues, what we found was that many of these issues could have been handled at the first point of contact. The problem is we had processes in place that didn't necessarily allow that. So people were more concerned about getting in trouble than focusing on the customer. And so the decision-making authority has to reside or should be at the level of the person who's engaging with the customer. That reduces the level of effort at the customer's level, and it creates a better experience for the employees. And about those employees, I'm going to say it, CX begins with EX. So the employee experience needs to be at the very front of this change management process. If you get employees who actually care, or to use an acronym, GAS, which means give a, and you can figure out what the S means, you're going to get people who are going to go the extra mile because they now understand, one, they have the authority to take care of a customer because that's at the center of the thought process. Then number two, they're actually going to want to do that because you've now reframed the discussion, told them that their job matters. It is a skill, and it's not something that just anyone can do. And so what that looks like when you put your decision making at the frontline level, it means you got to do a couple of things that are a little bit scary. First is you got to trust your team. I mean, at the end of the day, you hired them for a job, let them do that job. But you just can't let them go willy-nilly in the contact center. You've got to set some guardrails. But these are the people who do the job every day. Your frontline teams, they know what needs to be done to take care of the customers. Let them do that. Work within the parameters. It's a joint effort. Now, about those goodwill gestures, allow a budget that lets things get done in real time. And so when I talked about when I was having to handle executive escalations, we gave some of our best agents the ability to solve those problems in real time. We saw a 37% reduction in escalations year over year simply because they understood what the end game needed to be. And by you empowering those agents, what that does is it drives up retention. You can now have different sorts of conversations with your customers, and it creates a frictionless experience for your agents. Those are all the things that are best practices. And then you celebrate and reward. You got to celebrate those folks who are actually going above and beyond when you empower your teams. And so to quickly recap, you might want to get rid of your scripts, take a look at some of your processes, but also understand, solve the customer's issue where it occurs. Those teams who know best should be allowed to do their best. Now, the third
Hey,
piece. Yes,
real quick,
absolutely.
JP. I
Absolutely.
would just say I fully agree with you. EX driving CX, I think that is absolutely true. But in your experience, how have you seen the measurement of employee experience and then the measure of customer experience to actually kind of quote unquote show the map where it makes that connection? How have you seen that in the past?
So a couple of things. When I think about employee experience, it shows up in little things like, think about a contact center. One of the biggest issues you have is attendance. It shows up there. It shows up in error rate. It shows up in so many different areas where when that employee is not engaged, they don't give the effort. It shows up in compliance. It shows up in so many of the things that you look at. Are we doing the right recap? Are we applying the policies? Are we showing up for work? It shows up in sentiment. We listen for the customer sentiment, but we also listen for the employee sentiment on these calls. So those are your tells, if you will, of whether or not your employee is engaged in experience. And when you ask them for help or you ask them to come up with remedies for the business, are they forthright? Are they willing? You know, Sean, it's interesting. When we were at a conference last month, one of the things we talked about was, as we start to train businesses on AI, it was about a third of employees that were actively sabotaging the AI tool so it couldn't learn about the business. That's an engagement issue. That's not a AI issue. So those are the small behaviors that tend to show up in the business to tell you whether or not your employees are engaged. And a simple one for me has always been this. If you've got teams in your office and they go out for lunch, do they wear their badge? Do they wear the gear of the company, or do they hide it? That's probably one of the best litmus tests for whether or not your teams are engaged and proud of the work they do in the company they do it for. So great question. So third piece, turn service into sales opportunities. Now here's the thing. It's about training your teams to not just solve the problem that the customer is engaging with you about, but it's also solving future opportunities. And that's what helps you drive sales. Think about if you took your car to the mechanic and you wanted to get an oil change. You told the mechanic you're going on vacation. It's fine. They'll change your oil. But did they check your wipers? Did they check your tires? Did they check all those other things? So if you left that mechanic and you got a flat tire on the way home and you knew your tires were bald or need to be changed, your whole experience is going to be impacted by that engagement. But don't just do what the customer is asking you to do. Go above and beyond. Listen to what it is that they might need. And to that end, that's going to allow for additional sales opportunities. Now, I'm going to say a next best action tools using AI to help an agent have that sort of discussion. It says your customer has a certain profile and they have certain things that they're looking for. Have that conversation. So that turns you to a consultant. Now, I will say this, maybe about 20 years ago, we kicked off a program called Service to Sales. And to say that there was an uproar, a backlash, a mutiny would be an understatement, because my service people said, well, you didn't hire me to sell. You hired me to solve customers' problems, and that's all I want to do. But here's the rub. What is sales at its core? Anyone? Sales at its core is essentially identifying a customer's needs and simply filling that need. It's solving a problem. So the way we were able to change the mindset of our teams is simply say, listen, you're already in the helping profession. You solve problems for customers every day. A customer is not going to be resistant to you having a conversation about a solution that's going to meet their needs. But the one thing I will stress is you have to solve the initial problem first and foremost. Not the only thing you do, but you have to take care of what it is that they engage with you about. Out of that discussion, you're able to identify what are some other things that they might need and then make some solutions. And the reality is when you do that, you build trust with the customer, because, for lack of a better term, you've done them a solid in taking care of the things that they value most. Now they can trust you to have a different type of conversation, because it's coming from a place of help and not coming from a place of I'm trying to oversell you. So that's an important distinction, and helping the team listen for that with that trained ear to have that conversation. Your fourth strategy, leveraging AI and automation. Now, we were going to have a conversation today about AI and automation. So I'm going to make this one really simple. If you look on the left-hand side of the page, this is really about self-service. This is meeting a customer where they are. And if you think about a contact center being there to help reduce costs, well, this is one of these avenues that allows you to do that. Always on, always available to handle these low-level issues. You got almost 70% of customers say they prefer to use an AI solution, and especially if it's a quick issue. And one of the things that customers value is they value getting things done right the first time and getting them done quickly. And when you provide them with tools where they can service themselves, the productivity is much better because they're doing it themselves, and the customer satisfaction scores go up. Now, what this also allows you to do is we've taken care of the low-hanging fruit. Now humans can deal with the more complex issues, the cancellations, the trying to save a customer. Those are the things that humans should be best to do. Whereas on the other side of the page, you have your agent assist. In the event that AI is not able to pick off the low-hanging fruit, we now have given the agent the Iron Man suit to be able to respond to issues that are a little bit more complex with a little bit of technology sprinkled in. I want to talk about this first one, which is transcribing calls, because this becomes important. It becomes tedious in the contact center and it costs money. I'll give you an example. When you're transcribing calls, that contributes to your after call work. That can be 10 seconds, that can be 15 seconds. I can tell you the quick math and in some of my sites, if it was a 10-second increase, that cost me almost 40 agents, that cost me almost $3 million a year. And so if you're able to transcribe a call and have more agents available to take care of customers, you just save that company 40 agents, $3 million a year. It becomes easy math to do that. But one of the examples that we heard, one of the use cases that we heard recently was that there was a group of employees where transcribing calls was really difficult for them. And part of the reason why it was difficult is because some of them had a learning disability. And so it took them a lot longer to do that. So by a company implementing this sort of tool, it actually improved the agent experience. And they were very thankful. So not only did their job get easier, but by taking this off of their plate, they can now be more present to engage with customers. That's when you get the level of effort from an employee to increase. That's when that discretionary effort goes up. This allows you to now have the type of conversations where you can make a revenue type of suggestion to a customer. So these are all the sort of things that AI can help you do. And we've all seen some of the tools that are available out there, but I think here's the key point of this slide. 75% of companies, 3 out of 4, are going to be investing in AI next year. So it's really about how do you leverage this technology to pay for itself, to help you make more money. And we've talked about your agents here. GenAI is going to have the ability to reduce the contact rate, and the contact rate is one of those things that does cost a company money. But by self-serving and solving some of these issues, it can make the center profitable. Now, those remaining conversations that are had with agent can be a consultative conversation that allows us to upsell, to cross-sell, to renew, and to retain, land and expand, as we say in other parlance. So here are some of the best practices when we engage with AI. The first thing I'll say is, if you're going to do a test case, start small and start internal. As I mentioned, the summarization of the call, very simple to do. You can track the impact to the business, saves you a little bit of money. I'd also say train with your data. It's very, very important that if we're going to make recommendations to a customer and have a hyper-personalized experience, we have to have the right inputs and the right information that allows us to do that. Then we take that agent assist aspect of it and let the AI work with the low-hanging fruit, but have the human on standby. You never want to keep the human out of this. Agents are always standing by to resolve a customer's concerns. But after all of that, your metric for performance shouldn't be the containment rate, or it shouldn't be the bot accuracy. It should really be about, did AI allow me to do these 3 things? Save costs by reducing the amount of time in the transaction. Did it allow me to proactively save a customer by making a recommendation that makes them sticky? And then does my revenue per interaction go down simply because at each interaction I am now having a conversation about revenue? Good news, everyone is now a salesperson in this organization. Questions, comments, or thoughts so far?
Well, Skip had a good question, about, a lot of teams, CX teams and experience teams and even contact center teams and businesses that, they work in silos, right? Naturally.
Absolutely.
And so overcome, because it's like people, process, and tech all has to come together. And
Yes.
AI can be one of those techs that can actually take away from it. How do you make sure, or how do you see that balance coming into play and helping, connect the dots and not create the silos?
Well, so that brings me to the next point here. That's a great setup. I appreciate it. I think you looked ahead. So look at your strategy 5 about proactive engagement. You look at the lower right part of the screen, what you're really talking about is this omni-channel continuity. It allows the customer's data to flow across different channels, but that only happens when you have teams that are operating in different channels. See, the thing about CX is often used interchangeably with the contact center, and that's not accurate. CX is about what your customer thinks about you at your on your website, from your people to the product, all these different touch points. However, as I started with this discussion, the contact center can be a big part of CX, but it is not the beginning and end. So what we talk about is how does CX look at each step of the organization, and then how does the contact center help feed that information? So to break down those silos, if I'm in product, then CX looks like fewer defects. If I'm in sales, it's the product doing what it's supposed to do. If I'm in marketing, it's about we've targeted the right customer so that we don't have a churn issue in the back end. If it's in support, it's ensuring I have the right tools to be able to support that customer, and that case comes up without me having to spend 30 seconds scrolling through to figure in the, or in a CRM to figure out what that customer's issue is. So that is the way that we fix the continuity and eliminate the silos. And I'm also going to talk briefly about that in another slide. Well, I guess I'll address it here. But it is incumbent upon a CX leader to take this wealth of information that is generated in the contact center, whether it's through the mobile apps, it's through your CRM and whatnot. It is incumbent upon this leader to now feed this to the rest of the business to talk about what do customers like, what are their dislikes, what are the features that we need, what are the things we don't need, what's the customer's usage. All of this is contained in so many of these emails and text messages and phone calls and whatnot that we get within the contact center. As we start to articulate and frame those discussions for the rest of the business, we become valuable because we have the data that tells the business what's working. It isn't theory. It isn't a survey. This is 100% capture of interactions that provide the data before it becomes the data point. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Okay. One thing I'll talk about when we say proactive engagement is that when you think about support or your contact center, if everyone's selling and if everyone's solving a customer's issue and everyone's making this experience seamless, you're now engaged in proactive retention. And that is really where the money is made in the business. It's identifying a problem before it occurs and addressing it. It's almost like when you're at a restaurant and your server comes and fills up your glass before you ask. That's what a lot of these tools and engagement allow you to do as a business. And that drives your revenue. So if you look at the power of SMS, if you were to engage your customer that way and say that we're going to get a 99% open rate versus what we see for emails, apps, and social media, that becomes a great way to drive a positive experience. And those are some of the tools that we should lean into. Now, I want to briefly touch on companies that do this right, unless there are any questions at this point. So one of the companies that we've identified is T-Mobile. So if you think about 10, 15 years ago, T-Mobile had just absolute worst customer service among wireless providers. I mean, they were really challenged with providing a great experience for customers. So one of the things that they did, which was pretty radical, is that they had marketing rebranding, called themselves the Uncarrier. But what they did is they got rid of the traditional contact center setup and really had this fanatical focus on the customer experience. And they saw the contact centers as a strategic weapon to be able to do that. So what they did is created these pods. They called them team of experts, and they essentially took their customer base and broke it into various areas and said, you've got a dedicated group of individuals who can help you address your problems, address these concerns. So they got rid of all the other stuff that we think about. Part of those issues is that, one, I know who I'm talking to. They're a trusted advisor. They not only can solve my issues today, but now I'm open to having a different type of conversation from an upsell, cross-sell perspective. Now, what did they see as a result of that? Within a decade, the profits tripled. But more importantly, they won JD Powers. And so you look at their cost to serve went down because guess what? You eliminate those transfers, which is a better experience. The customers now know who they're speaking with and they rely on those advisors, and you have fewer cancellations simply because you have a much better experience overall. And so that's case study number one. The second one is Chewy. Are there any Are there any pet lovers or any dog owners in the audience here? Anyone ever heard of Chewy? So if you look at Chewy, they have good product. They've got a great selection. Not the cheapest. It's dog foods, it's pet services, is all these different things that they offer for the fur babies. But that's not what differentiates them. What really differentiates them is their focus on empathy as part of the support process. So similar to what we've seen in other areas, if it takes you an hour to speak with that customer, 2 hours, 10 minutes, whatever it is, do whatever it takes to resolve that issue during the first interaction. And that's important because let me tell you a little story here. So if you've lost a pet and they've crossed the Rainbow Bridge and Chewy knows about it, they will find you in social media. They will, especially if you haven't surfaced it, but let's just say, it's come up some sort of way. They will find out about it. They have over 1,000 individuals who are freelance artists who work for them, who will find an image of your pet. They will make an oil painting of it. They will ship it to you, usually within 24 hours or so, and it lands at your home. So now you've lost a pet. You have a customized, personalized painting or portrait of your animal. And this is what they do in terms of above and beyond. Now, the question I have for you all is, if you have a company that has that level of service, who understands your needs and is willing to go above and beyond, because that contact center is being leveraged to drive this sort of revenue, do you think those customers are going to go someplace else? Okay. And then the last one is Zappos. So they have this wow philosophy, and they were one of the first to have this kind of no scripts, no time limit, do what you need to do to take care of the customer, have these great conversations. And, there's this legendary 10-hour conversation that happened during an agent's entire shift. It was beautiful. But the point being is that what all of these companies have in mind is a relentless focus on the customer experience, and how the contact center is at the heart of that. Have the right type of the right type of conversation, so that you not only solve the customer's issue from a support perspective, but then it goes the extra mile to say, how do we keep this customer within the guardrails? And then how do we have a different type of conversation to upsell, cross-sell? So they have the handwritten notes, the thank yous, the flowers, and even this example where if they don't have your shoe, they'll get you a shoe from their competitor, because in the long run, they're thinking about the lifetime value of that particular customer. It isn't about the sale we make today. It's about how do we elevate the interaction so that you think about us first from an experience perspective. Now, this is more than just a case study. I actually visited about 12 years ago. I was in town for my niece's graduation, and I said, well, let me see if this Zappos thing is a real deal. So I called the phone number. They sent the Zappos wrap truck, which you can see at the bottom right of the screen. They opened up the contact center to me. They said, take as many pictures as you like. Let's talk about what our philosophy is. They have signage on the walls. They tell people you're empowered. They tell them that their job is important. They say go above and beyond for the customer. This was something that was a lived experience, if you will. The other thing I found fascinating is if you look at the center of the slide, they have these kind of gold records or what have you, these gold and silver records on the wall. This commemorates when someone does something above and beyond, something phenomenal, which is, you think about it, it's more than just that thank you note. You're being commemorated with your own plaque, similar to selling a million records or something like that. So, which was pretty cool. But I think one of the things that I found interesting was that they said, regardless of what role a person was hired into in the organization, that first week in the organization, they were going to take calls in a contact center because they really needed to understand the customer experience from the ground up. So that was an example of, you've got to live this philosophy, and it has to permeate so that customer service becomes it's not a department, but it is a way that we engage externally. And so when we think about what are those best practices of those centers that are profit generating, the very first one is they're going to tie CX metrics to business outcome. And so that becomes, when we talk about, it isn't just about CSAT, but it's CSAT related to, are we retaining customers? It's keeping a customer a key stat. We talk about at-risk customers, whether we use AI to identify that or just simply listening and reviewing these interactions. And then we have our best agents or agents who are skilled to retain those customers. It's a lot cheaper, as we mentioned, than acquiring a new one. Then it's about empowering your people. You have your frontline teams, they have the right training, you turn them loose and say, I hired you to take care of the customer, do that. And then leveraging AI to do the heavy lifting, but retaining humans to do the more complex tasks. And when I talk about sales and service, it's not sales and service. Every interaction is proactive retention. If I have an opportunity to talk to a customer about our products, about our brand, about their experience, that's what I'm going to do. And then we start to track that to recognize opportunities where we can either sell or keep a customer inside the fold. And then, of course, measure what matters. Again, what do customers care about? They want issues resolved quickly. They don't want a lot of effort. But most importantly is, as an organization, we need to be able to show that first contact resolution reduces our cost to serve, and it has a direct impact on the bottom line of the business. Now, Sean, you mentioned earlier about those silos. So I just want to quickly touch on this piece here about the importance of the feedback loop from the contact center perspective. We've got a lot of data that comes through on surveys. We get social media. We listen to agent calls. The most important piece is not only do you analyze patterns and you make recommendations for improvements, but you have to share this with the business. It does us no good to have a contact center have these to have these engagements, to put out these fires, but not inform the business as to what we should be doing better. This is really the critical piece of how you get a seat at the table when strategic decisions are made, when investments are being made in the business. It says, I have the data, I have the customer experience, I have a framework as to what's best in class, and then I feed these insights back to the business. That is how you turn your center from a cost center to a revenue producing center. So you close that loop. And I'll say the last piece of that, it all starts with these elements here. You've got to shift the mindset. Everyone needs to talk about ROI, the return on investment, customer retention, sales, revenue. So you think about how a business is evaluated. We're either increasing customers, we're increasing revenue, or we're doing it in a profitable manner. All of those things happen in every contact center. So that is the first conversation needs to happen. Not saying the other metrics aren't important to manage, but what's going to come out of the contact center world is a language of ROI. Number two, your frontline teams. Give them the authority to solve customer issues while engaging with customers. Should not require management approval, so help them do their job better. If you create that experience for your teams and improve their processes, that in effect improves the customer's processes and improves their experience. And we talk about integrating sales and service. Everyone's a salesperson. Congratulations, you just got a promotion. Everyone has an opportunity to reinforce the brand at that moment of truth. You're either supporting customers or you're supporting the person that supports the customer to have that conversation that says why we're the best value in town. In a world where everyone's going to have some sort of AI solution, what's going to differentiate you is a team that puts CX at the front of that discussion, that puts their people at the front of that discussion. That is what's going to drive a unique experience that's going to differentiate you in the marketplace. And last but not least, it's engaging proactively. Do not put out the fire when it happens. Don't just do that. We do that today. That's the traditional contact center model. It is about figuring out where the matches are. Engage proactively. Who's likely to buy? Who's likely to churn? What are the issues that customers are complaining about? What are the things they like? How do we engage with them? What type of outreach do you use? So it moves the discussion from inbound retention or reactive to an outbound retention or proactive. And those are the things that reduce churn. And those are the things that you have agency over in the contact center. So with that said, stop apologizing. These are not expenses. These are investments in the customer experience so that we inoculate our customers from going to the competition. And when you reframe it that way, your contact center now becomes a valuable place of customer insights, information, sales opportunities, and drives the overall CX experience of the organization. And once again, I'm JP Dumas. Would love to have a conversation with you about how to fix your CX problems.
Well, thank you, JP. And I will say, I mean, great content, and I love the examples. I know. So I worked at T-Mobile back at the right around the turn of the century, which is
Mm-hmm.
weird to say that, but we can say that. And we were winning JD Power Awards like crazy, and then I left, and they no, but then they
It was you.
they changed leadership, and
Yep.
they started focusing on numbers and dollars
Yep.
and things like that, and they completely lost. And then to your point, they had to almost reinvent themselves again with a third,
Mm-hmm. That's
CEO.
right.
It's amazing that even great companies lose their way for a while if they don't have that focus as you described.
Well, absolutely. It's the revenue. Those are outcomes of the behaviors that focus on the customers. But when you start changing the outcomes first, and you forget the underpinnings that drive the performance, then to your point, now you're back in a rebuild.
Yeah. Other comments or questions for JP? Feel free to come off mute and jump in. All right.
Love the conversation, JP. And I got to figure out how to do slides the way you do. Yours come out so much more professional than my third grade slides that I put together. But huge topic, very timely because we were running into it for years where CX was just seen as a cost center. And I have to fault most of the customer experience professionals, including myself, right? We were way too tied into NPS and surveys and data just for the sake of data. And at the same time, we were doing a terrible job at tying it to the business, right? Okay, what does that mean in terms of business impact? So I put a little quote in the chat, and I think it kind of envelops a lot what you were talking about tying CX to the business, that you're here to solve some business friction by translating some customer insight into some financial opportunity and holding somebody accountable to drive that change. And when you do all those things put together, I think that's what you're trying to tell us today, but go ahead and correct me.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. We've left too much to interpretation. Like the rest of the business is somehow going to know what NPS, how it shows up on the stat line, if you will. What's CSAT going to do? What is reduction in HT? Like these like we're speaking a language that only CX people know, whereas the rest of the business is talking dollars, cents, impact, customer growth, and whatnot. And so, as we mentioned before, we suffer from bad PR, but for a large part, it's been our fault because we haven't just spelled it out in black and white. How many customers is that? And you take 1 million interactions. How many did you sell? How many did you save? It becomes a simple math equation at that point. Now, how we get there, then that's all the other stuff we laid out, the strategy. Make sure people engage, make sure we have the right tools, make sure that we have change management process where everyone understands they're now selling, make sure that we're listening. All of that stuff is the how, but the what needs to be the top line is if you're not able to pay for yourself, if you're not able to articulate the value you bring to the business, then the understanding is you inherently have no value. And that's why we've seen the retrenchment in a lot of the CX roles. We just simply haven't translated that.
JP,
Absolutely.
I've enjoyed the conversation as well. Hi, I'm Keith.
Hey,
I
Keith.
work for Medallia, so I have a lot of different clients. And
Yeah.
one client literally just hit me up the other day. Would love to get this group's take on it.
No.
They were like, "Hey, we've got to improve our average handle time by like 32%." And I'm like, "Okay, so we're going to drop handle time, and how's that going to impact the customer like retention strategy or And my bigger question for them was like, well, what's your call avoidance strategy? Like, why worry about handle time so much if you're
Well,
not doing anything for call avoidance? But that was my initial gut reaction, but I'd love to hear some other experts
yeah,
on the
I
call here.
mean, what the purposes of reducing average handle time seems to suggest to me, and they'll throw it out to the group, that you have a lot of calls coming in. So what are you doing around the issues that are driving your calls? What are you doing around self-service? It sounds like a contact rate issue. What
Hmm.
is happening in your business is driving the contact rate. So don't wait for it to get to your contact center. There is a product, sales, marketing, experience, delivery, billing, whatever it is. Pick a business unit and start
Yeah,
picking out that problem. Remember, these most contact centers typically don't drive their own volume. Unless you're an inbound
right.
sales center, you don't drive your own volume. There's something in the business. So being that canary in the mine shaft is now an opportunity to say, hey, listen, if you've heard this a million times and we have the data, we need to be telling the business, here are the things that are broken. Otherwise you're just gonna get more of it. You're gonna get more things to fix.
Yeah. I think they're finding out the hard way because I think like 55 people got laid off in that area. It's a large retailer. So like and so now they're like regrouping and I'm like, but the irony, they're actually hiring a bunch of people back because nobody knows what's going on.
Well, exactly. But the reality is that okay, we do layoffs. The customers didn't go anywhere.
Right.
Like
Exactly.
they still need to be serviced. And so
Yep.
that's how do you service the customer and why are we servicing them and whatnot.
Yeah.
Customers do not sit there and say, I want to engage with my provider of choice over and above. There
Right.
is I often have told my team, I said, if a customer's engaging with us, they should be buying something. They usually aren't, which means the cost of serve has gone up, which means there's a problem in the business. Why aren't we asking that question? That's the
Mhm.
value that we give. Otherwise, we have an expensive acquisition problem because just going to fill the bucket. We're going to spend a ton of money to acquire that one customer, to fill it, and we hope they pay us as much as the one that left us. I don't care if you're B2B, B2C, that is a fundamental issue.
100%.
All right. With JP, I know we're at time, so I want to thank you so much for joining and sharing really some great content. And everybody give him a thanks. A little bit of a virtual
Yeah. Thanks for staying awake.
cheer there.
Yep. No
But
one's
and as said, we do these sessions every week. In fact, we've got another one tomorrow. So hopefully you're part of the CX on the Rocks community. You can see these upcoming events, and look forward to seeing you on the next ones. So until then, we'll talk to you guys. Thank you.
all right.